Welcome back to History Otherwise, where we explore the paths not taken in history. Today we are walking down a particularly shadowy corridor of the past. Imagine a world where the British government, the mother of parliaments, is overthrown. Not by a violent revolution, not by a foreign invasion, but by, well, a polite conversation over tea in a drawing room in Belgravia.
It sounds like the plot of a political thriller, doesn't it? But what makes this scenario so chilling, and the reason we're doing this deep dive today, is just how close it came to reality. We are looking at May 1968. The United Kingdom is fragile, the economy is shaking, and a group of very powerful men decide that democracy has, well, run its course.
And the most terrifying part is that this isn't science fiction. We're working from a stack of very real sources here: memoirs, diaries from government scientists, declassified files. I mean, the meeting actually happened. The people were real. The only thing that separates our world from this dystopian timeline is a single decision made by one man. So what's the roadmap for this deep dive?
We're going to break this down into three parts. First, we have what we're calling the Belgravia tipping point. That's the quiet decision that changes everything.
Okay.
Then we'll look at the execution, a very British coup that doesn't rely on tanks, but on, newspapers and phone calls. And finally, we'll explore the aftermath, the descent into a fortress Britain, and the disintegration of the United Kingdom.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand how a coup could even be discussed in Britain, we have to understand the mood of 1968. Because looking back, popular culture paints the late 60s in London as this golden age. The Beatles, miniskirts.
Carnaby Street. But it was far from a golden age. If you look at the economic indicators in the sources, 1968 Britain felt like a nation having, well, a nervous breakdown. The critical context here is the devaluation of the pound. In November 67, the government had to devalue sterling by over 14%.
And for listeners who aren't economists, let's just clarify that. That basically means the money in everyone's pocket suddenly bought significantly less on the world stage. It's a huge hit to national prestige.
Exactly. It was a national humiliation. It shattered confidence in Harold Wilson's Labour government. But it wasn't just the money. The social fabric felt like it was tearing apart. You had the anti-war protests turning violent in Grosvenor Square.
Right, police battling students outside the U.S. Embassy.
And then, just weeks before this plot kicks off, you have Enoch Powell delivering his infamous Rivers of Blood speech.
Which created a powder keg of racial tension.
It was toxic. To the establishment, the old guard, the generals, it looked like the wheels were coming off. They saw economic ruin, social unrest, a government that had lost control. They didn't see democracy struggling. They saw anarchy. And that's where Cecil King comes in.
Cecil King. Now, this is a name that might not mean much to everyone today, but in the media landscape of the 1960s, he was an absolute titan.
Think Rupert Murdoch's, but perhaps even more embedded in the establishment. He was the chairman of the International Publishing Corporation. He owned the Daily Mirror, which had a readership of millions. The sources tell us he was genuinely convinced Britain was heading for a catastrophe and that it was his duty to intervene.
So, set the scene for us. It's May 8, 1968. Where are we?
We are at 2 Kinnerton Street in Belgravia. It's the London flat of Lord Mountbatten. And we really need to understand who Mountbatten is to get the stakes here. He's royalty. He's the Queen's cousin, a war hero, last Viceroy of India.
The ultimate establishment figure. He connects the military, the monarchy, and the political class. And Cecil King comes to him with a proposition. Who else is in the room?
There's Hugh Cudlip, King's editorial director, and Sir Solly Zuckerman, the government's chief scientific advisor. And King lays it all out. He says the government is collapsing, bloodshed is coming, and Wilson has to go. He wants to install a government of national unity, and he wants Mountbatten to lead it.
And here's where it gets really interesting. In our history, this is where the whole thing just dies. Sir Solly Zuckerman, a man of, by all accounts, immense integrity, he stood up and shouted that this was rank treachery.
He stormed out. Mountbatten, seeing which way the wind was blowing, agreed with him, called it dangerous nonsense, and that was that.
But for this deep dive, we're in the history otherwise scenario, and we have to look at the variable that changes everything. Mountbatten's psychology. He's 67, he's been sidelined, he's famously vain.
Loves a uniform, and he loves the idea of being the savior. So in this timeline, when King says, "Only you have the authority to prevent blood in the streets," Mountbatten listens. He doesn't look at Zuckerman, he looks at King.
That's the pivot. Instead of dismissing it, he taps into that sense of aristocratic duty mixed with, pure ego. He looks at Zuckerman and says, "Solly, one must consider all eventualities. The first duty of any officer is to the crown and the stability of the realm."
And just like that, the fuse is lit. The coup moves from a fantasy to an active conspiracy, the tea is finished, and the plan begins.
I want to drill down on the mechanics here, because when I hear coup, I think of tanks rolling down Whitehall. But you have argued this would look very different.
Oh, much more subtle. This is a Whitehall putsch. It's administrative. It starts with the media. Remember, Cecil King owns the Daily Mirror. In our timeline, he actually wrote an article calling for Wilson to go and got fired for it. But in this timeline, with Mountbatten's backing, it's a coordinated blitz.
So the headlines aren't just reporting a crisis, they're manufacturing one.
Precisely. The papers scream that the economy is collapsing, that anarchy is days away. They create a self-fulfilling prophecy of fear. It creates a run on the pound. The city of London starts pulling money out of the country.
And while all this chaos is swirling, Mountbatten makes his move. But he's not ordering troops to march on Downing Street.
No, that's too crude. He creates a vacuum of support. He just calls up senior commanders, men he's known for decades, and he ensures their loyalty is to the crown, not the prime minister. It's a very subtle signal. If Wilson calls for help, don't pick up the phone.
It's the squeeze. Wilson is in number 10. The price is destroying him, the markets are crashing, and the military is signaling neutrality, which is effectively a vote of no confidence.
Checkmate. On May 10th, a delegation visits Wilson. It's King, a field marshal, a peer. They tell him, resign to save the nation. Wilson realizes he has no cards left to play.
So he goes to the palace to resign. And this puts the Queen in an absolutely impossible position. This is the ultimate constitutional crisis.
It is. Wilson resigns. Normally, she'd wait for the Labour Party to pick a new leader. But the plotters present her with a memo. They advise her to appoint Mountbatten to lead a government of national salvation.
But would she actually do it? I mean, the Queen is a stickler for the rules.
That's the critical question. But consider her options. The implication for Mountbatten, her own cousin, is clear. If she refuses, the military might act anyway. The monarchy could fall. If she accepts, she saves the institution but suspends democracy. In this timeline, she chooses survival. She accepts. Parliament is prorogued indefinitely.
So we wake up on May 11th. Parliament is closed. Mountbatten is in charge of an emergency council. What does this new Britain look like on the ground?
On the surface, in London, it's actually calm. There's a sense of getting on with it. But strikes are made illegal immediately. Union leaders like Jack Jones are arrested. The press is censored using something called the D-notice system.
Can you explain the D-notice system for us? It's a term that pops up, but how does it actually work?
It stands for defense notice. In reality, it's a request from the government to editors not to publish things for national security reasons. It's usually voluntary. Under this regime, it becomes mandatory. It's a polite muzzle. You can publish your paper, but if you criticize the council, you're shut down. It's a dictatorship, but a very British one.
But the UK isn't just London. And this is where the united part of the kingdom starts to crack, isn't it? The notes suggest this is where the real tragedy begins.
This is the fatal flaw of the coup. It's seen by the plotters as saving the nation, but in Scotland and Wales, it looks like an English occupation. Nationalism was already bubbling up in the late 60s. Now, you've just proven their point. Westminster is undemocratic.
So we see actual resistance.
Oh, yes. Soldiers on the streets of Glasgow. That drives recruitment for independence movements through the roof. But the real catastrophe is Northern Ireland.
Right, because 1968 is the start of the Troubles in our real timeline. How does the coup change that?
It pours gasoline on the fire. The civil rights movement in Northern Ireland started peacefully asking for British rights, but now the British Constitution has been torn up, the moderate leaders are completely undermined, and think about who is now running the UK. Lord Mountbatten.
A symbol of empire.
The ultimate symbol. For the IRA, this is the greatest recruiting tool imaginable. They can say, look, the mask is off. It's a military dictatorship. The conflict explodes years earlier and far, far more violently.
So domestically, it's a mess. What about the rest of the world? I can't imagine the United States is happy about this.
LBJ would have been furious. The special relationship effectively dies overnight. The U.S. cannot be allied with a military junta, especially during the Cold War. It's a PR nightmare for them.
And speaking of the Cold War, the Soviet Union must be loving this.
Oh, they're laughing. Think about the timing. August 1968, the Soviets invade Czechoslovakia to crush the Prague Spring. The West condemned it as tyranny. But in this timeline, Moscow just points at London. They say, you overthrow your government to restore order. We are doing the same in Prague. It hands them a massive propaganda victory.
That's a fascinating point. It completely neutralizes the West's moral high ground.
It does, and Britain becomes an international pariah. The Commonwealth fractures. Canada, Australia, they can't pledge allegiance to a queen whose government is a dictatorship. They just walk away. Britain is isolated.
Let's talk about the culture. Because when I think of the 70s in the UK, even with the problems, I think of this incredible explosion of creativity. Punk rock, David Bowie, Monty Python.
All gone, or at least driven deep underground.
Yeah.
The Emergency Council views that whole permissive society as the cause of the rot. They want to return to decency and traditional values.
So instead of the Sex Pistols, we get, what, hymns?
You get the silent 70s. The Lord Chamberlain's censorship powers, which were abolished in 1968 in real life, are expanded. No Monty Python making fun of the establishment, no rebellious music. And you get a massive brain drain. The artists, the writers, the intellectuals, they just leave. London becomes a cultural graveyard.
That is just depressing. And I assume the economy didn't actually get better, which was the whole justification for the coup.
That's the bitter irony, isn't it? They did this to save the economy, but by isolating Britain, they killed it. They create a fortress economy, strict capital controls, import rationing. Instead of the painful but necessary reforms of the 80s, Britain is stuck with inefficient, militarized state industries. It becomes a museum of the 1950s that just gets rustier.
So we don't get the Thatcher era at all.
No Thatcher, no privatization, no Big Bang in the city. Just a slow, grinding decline managed by faceless generals. Mountbatten dies in 1979 peacefully in this timeline, not by an IRA bomb, and he's just replaced by a committee man.
So fast forward to today. What does Fortress Britain look like in this scenario?
It's grim. Think of it as North Korea with tea. A Britnet instead of the global internet, heavily censored, surveillance cameras everywhere for political control. King Charles III sits on the throne, but he's in a gilded cage, presiding over a nation that is totally irrelevant on the world stage.
A museum of the 1950s. That is a haunting image. It brings us to the big philosophical question of this deep dive then. What does this tell us about our own system?
It forces us to ask, what actually protects democracy? We like to think it's ancient laws or sturdy institutions that run on autopilot, but this story shows us that institutions are incredibly fragile.
It really just comes down to people, doesn't it?
It does. In reality, the only thing that stopped this timeline from happening wasn't a law. It wasn't the police. It was character. It was Sir Solly Zuckerman having the guts to yell treachery in that room. And it was Lord Mountbatten, for all his flaws, ultimately realizing he couldn't cross that line.
It makes you look at the real 1970s differently. The strikes, the arguments, the three-day week. It was messy. It was uncomfortable.
Incredibly messy. But that mess was the sound of freedom surviving, the ability to argue, to protest, to vote a government out. That's what prevents the silence of the fortress.
That is a powerful thought to leave us with. The mess is better than the silence.
Every single time.
And for you listening, here's a final thought to chew on. If Mountbatten had said yes, and the coup had happened, would we even know about it today? Or would the history books in that timeline just describe it as a necessary patriotic correction? History is written by the victors, after all. Thanks for listening to this deep dive into the history otherwise. We'll see you next time.